the Industrial General Permit Notice of Intent No Exposure Certification Training. And we're going to go through some ground rules, a little bit about the venue you're in. So if anybody needs to use the restroom, you go out these doors and then you take a left and there's the boys and girls room. If we have an evacuation of any kind, run out those doors. Don't run out that door. You'll get stuck. And then you go out to the front in the parking lot, don't get hit. And then you just wait out there and don't wait in here if there's a fire. The other thing I want to say is we do have a broadcast today for people who are listening in. So any questions, we're going to be running the mics around. So if you raise your hand, just give us a little time to come and give you the mic so everyone on the webcast can hear it. So everyone on the webcast, welcome as well. If you have questions on the webcast, please email the email address on the screen, which is laurel.wardrop@waterboards.ca.gov. When we get to the end of the presentations per session, we'll be looking at the questions coming in from the webcast and reading those off to the audience. So this is a very brief introduction. The other presenters will be kind of going into more of the detail of the day, but the training is designed to go through kind of the basic information a city inspector or a new regional board inspector would have if they went out to a facility. It's not a general permit 101 because it gets into a lot of details. That's almost a whole day of training just on that. We want to get you the things you really need to know, some tools when you go out to discharge your site, as well as just having a conversation. It's really nice when people are here and they can meet each other, and a lot of good questions come out of that as well. So some networking. So that's really the point of today, but it is not a general permit 101 class. We do have some videos of the permit that's a couple years old, but it kind of goes through the whole permit in great detail, and we're here to answer any questions for you. So we'll be doing presenter introductions a little bit later when Jared comes up. So are there any questions to start off? Oh, I have one question. I'll answer my own question. If you have a paper ticket, please put it in the stack. We're doing a raffle. So we're going to pick a ticket and you get something. If you had an electronic ticket, we're going to write your name down and we'll put those in there as well if you want to be entered in the raffle. So thank you for coming, and that's all I had unless there's other questions. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Laurel. Well, thank everybody for coming here today. My name is Jared Richardson. I'm just going to do a brief introduction on the PowerPoints that we're going to, excuse me, get this the right size here, on the PowerPoints and the information we're going to go through today. And we'll do a brief presenter introduction following that as well. To start out, this, as Laurel mentioned, this training is going to talk about general overview of the types of enrollments that we have in the program, NOI and NEC requirements, which is Notice of Intent and No Exposure Certification. We're also going to touch on NONA, which is Notice of Non-Applicability, and information regarding submittals and information that goes into the SMART system. We're going to talk about activities subject to the Industrial General Permit and Attachment A specifically, those 9 categories. Along with that, we'll discuss SIC codes and examples for facilities that would qualify for coverage under either the NOI or NEC requirements of the permit. We're going to touch on those that may not be subject to the IGP based on SIC code requirements or other non-applicability requirements. This training will also get really more in depth, as Laurel mentioned. We're not going to talk a lot about each of the nuances of the Industrial General Permit, but more so on what are the SIC code items, the Notice No Exposure Certification requirements, including what is the definition of no exposure, what's the checklist items, which is a checklist. We'll go through that in detail in a later session. Some storm-resistant shelters, and how to file for NEC and SMARTs, as well as some specific NEC facility examples. Following that, we'll have some pictures and photographs, and myself and other presenters here will have some items, and we'll take questions. I believe we're going to have a breakout session kind of quiz for the audience to engage in as well throughout this process. These are the facilitators that are going to be helping with the training today. I'm just going to briefly point these out. First one is Reagan Morey with State Water Resource Control Board.
Hi, my name's Reagan, and a little history about myself is I went to San Diego State, got my degree in environmental engineering. Then I moved up to Sacramento to go to grad school, and first day of class, I raised my hand and said, "Hi, my name's Reagan, and I need a job." Luckily enough, somebody from actually this regional board office had a student position open, so that started me with the water boards. I worked under the WDR unit here for about a year and a half, and then I got my full-time job at the state board, worked another year in the WDR unit, and have been in the stormwater unit for the last 5 years. I was a co-author on the new permit with Laurel and a couple other people, and yeah, and I'm working on IGP mostly nowadays, so I'll be available to answer questions as well.
Okay, thank you, Reagan. Our next presenter was Rebecca Greenwood, here with the State Water Board as well.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Greenwood. I'm with the State Water Board. I am a graduate of Cal Poly Pomona. I have a degree in geology. I started here in Region 5S about a year ago, and I was working in the compliance and enforcement for stormwater, and I moved to the State Board in September of last year, and I work on IGP implementation and smarts everything. So customer service, customer service, customer service. If you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to help.
Thanks, Rebecca. And my name again is Jared Richardson. I'm actually a US EPA contractor. We're working here collaboratively with the State Board to do these trainings. We've supported the board in help with the permit, both on compliance and also some evaluations in the past. And so we'll be available here for questions as well throughout the next day. This slide just kind of mentions our 4 main sessions and the presenters that are going to be included in these sessions. I just wanted to kind of point out the little bit of our audience. We have somewhat of a varied audience for these this training today. The majority of our audience is going to be in the municipal, city, county, university folks, as well as consultants, state of California regulators, regional boards, and also some US EPA participation as far as the audience is concerned. And with that, we're going to get into our next session, which is going to talk about industrial general permit in the SMART system.
All right. So as Laurel mentioned before, I am giving a brief overview of the industrial general permit. This is not permit training. I will talk about some things in the permit, but we are not going to go in depth on a lot of it. So if you guys have separate IGP questions, please feel free to email me, call me. I will be more than happy to talk about them with you. Okay, so the new industrial general permit, as most of you guys know, went into effect July 1, 2015. And our industrial stormwater permit controls stormwater discharges from industrial activities, and this is federally defined. And we have our system housed in something that's called the Stormwater Multiple Application and Report Tracking System, or SMARTS, which gives active permits WDID numbers, which are waste discharge identification numbers. And here's just some current numbers for you guys. We have currently, as of last week, 8,830 enrollees for full coverage or notice of intent coverage. No exposure, we have 1,977, so about 2,000 no exposure facilities, and about 150 people who have notice of non-applicability. And I will be going over each of these briefly and telling you a little bit about what's going on with those types of coverages. So many of you might have worked in the old 1997 permit. So we do have a couple of different requirements coming into this new 2015 2015 permit or 2014 permit. So one of those is no exposure certification, which is available statewide. Many people who had the light industry exemption are starting to file for these. This would certify that they have no exposure of industrial activities or materials outside exposed to stormwater. A lot of these facilities are completely contained in huge buildings, but Reagan will be going over some of the nuances of some of these types of facilities and what you should be looking for in inspections. We also have a definition of no discharge for the NONAs. People who were previously exempt, saying that they had no discharges to sample. We have the notice of non-applicability, and we define no discharge as being able to contain the largest storm or series of storm events within data from NOAA systems. I will be going over this a little bit more. We also have minimum best management practices. I will talk a little bit about those. Some of the big ones now for the notice of intent, people who have full coverage, which you might not be so interested in, are we have numeric action levels and exceedance response actions. This will require a couple of different tasks from the discharger, and it will skip to the next portion, which involves the qualified industrial stormwater practitioner, QISP. Not to be confused with the QSP for construction or the QSD for construction as well. And then, as I mentioned previously, we have SMARTS as our electronic reporting system. This is required by the EPA. Everything within the next 5 years for the EPA of these permits and PDS will be phased to electronic reporting systems. So if you didn't know that, now you do. We also have a portion in the permit about ocean plans, TMDLs, and impairments. These are pretty important. If they're a new discharger coming in, they may need a QISP, but we are not going to be really going over that today. There are also design storm standards for new treatment BMPs for people who are wanting to put in detention or retention basins. Those are flow-based or volume-based. And then we also have changes to monitoring requirements, and I'll go over that a little bit. Okay, so activities covered by the IGP. So we have 40 CFR here, and I've quoted the section, and it defines stormwater associated with the industrial activity, and it defines and identifies the types of facilities subject to the permitting. Our attachment A, if you guys don't have this permit, you should probably look at it and read it, and it is, very, very important for you. And attachment A goes over all of these activities that we cover in our permit and what would be subject to permitting. This attachment A is based off of your standard industrial classification code or your SIC code or SIC code. These SIC codes are based off of the manual, and Reagan will talk about that in a little bit.
Sorry to interrupt. They want us to speak up on the webinar.
Speak up, okay.
So use your rock star voice.
I'm too loud most of the time, so I wasn't trying to be so loud, sorry.
Be loud.
The SIC code book, which we also have on our website, available now. We got it to be scanned in PDF, so if you don't have a copy, you can enjoy your own electronic version at home online. And so we cover discharges to waters of the United States. If you don't know about that, you should probably look it up. These are very important. We have some places where dischargers do not discharge to waters of the United States and can apply for a NONA or can get an exemption from the permit if they are not discharging to waters of the United States. And so the Stormwater Enforcement Act of 1998 is what we have enforcement on under non-filers. So if you guys, as county inspectors, find somebody that does not have current industrial general permit coverage and would like to notify your regional board, you're, helping us, and we can help get them into the correct coverage that they need. And if not, we may have them subject to enforcement under this non-filer. So attachment A, I just kind of gave a brief rundown. If you guys read this in the permit, it's got a lot of words. So I just broke it down into a couple of the sections. So manufacturing SIC codes, mining, oil, and gas operations, RCRA, hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal, landfill operations, recycling, steam and electric power generating, transportation, and sewer treatment over 1 million gallons per day. So, types of IGP coverage that we offer are the notice of intent, and I just gave a couple of key portions for each type of coverage. I would like to note that the notice of non-applicability is not technically a type of coverage. Again, it is an exclusion saying that you are not subject to this permit, but we refer to them as a type of coverage so that you guys know, because they are assigned a WDID, a special WDID, when they're inputted into our SMART system. So you can look those up. So for the notice of intent, we require a stormwater pollution prevention plan, or a SWIP, a site map. You will be doing monitoring for the entire reporting period, and you will be doing the electronic reporting requirements, along with installing and practicing best management practices. The fee for this is $1,282. These fees can change depending on the fiscal year. They can either go up or down depending on how many people we have in our permit. Recently, it did go down from $1,415, which used to be about $1,600. The second type of coverage that we have is a no exposure certification. The no exposure certification is a lot more simple than the notice of intent. It does require a site map that is comparable to the notice of intent site maps, and it does require an annual recertification saying that you certify that there's still a condition of no exposure annually, and that'll be done on October 1. The fee for this is $200. Again, this is a little bit flexible per fiscal year, but it should stay pretty low. And finally, the notice of non-applicability, which requires a no discharge technical report signed by a professional engineer, and this does not require a fee. So the notice of intent, this is kind of preluding to a little bit of stuff that I'll talk about for SMARTs. And you will have the NOI, which is like the application, requires all the owner operator information, facility information, what you're doing with your SIC code. The SWIP, your designed plan, that's saying what you're going to do to be, managing your stormwater and what you're going to do to help reduce pollutant loads. And your site map, we will go over that a little bit. Your application fee, and what's called an electronic authorization form, or an EAuth form, which is required for SMARTs per the EPA. And all of these, again, are required to be submitted through SMARTs. If somebody says that they have filed an application, a paper application with us, please tell them and direct them to SMARTs, as we do not accept paper applications anymore. So the SWIP. In a couple of these, I put the permit sections for you guys to refer to, so if you have more questions or you want to look at them, you can go through this. But your SWIP is a public document, and it is enforceable. It is your plan for all of your industrial stormwater and what you're discharging and how you're managing your stormwater in general. It is a living document, and people should be updating this. We have rules in the permit that say you should be updating your permit, or you should be updating your SWIP according to the permit per however many changes you make, if they're significant or insignificant. Something significant would be like changing monitoring points that you're doing compliance samples from, and something maybe insignificant would be changing a pollution prevention team member. And we're not requiring you to update those consistently, but if you have significant changes like changing a monitoring point, you should be uploading those to SMARTs. And the SWIP is really the first line of defense. If you go to a facility and they say, I have NOI coverage and here's my WDID number, you can ask them for their SWIP. It should have a pretty detailed site map, which will help you when you're doing your inspection about where their drainages are going, where they're sampling their discharges, and really what's going on with their industrial activities at the site. So the SWIP, Section X in the IGP, it requires the facility information and maps, list of industrial materials, description and assessment of potential pollutant sources. This is really big. They need to be identifying what potential pollutants could be discharged in their industrial stormwater from their industrial activity. They also should be identifying minimum and advanced BMPs. They have a monitoring and implementation plan, and they will complete an annual evaluation with their annual report, which is due July 15th. And that requires a whole walkthrough and kind of an evaluation of what's going on with your SWIP. So if you need any revisions, you should be doing them with that annual evaluation. And the preparation date, just who prepared it, when it was prepared. Again, like I said, it should be a living document. So you don't want to see something that's, 10 years old. If somebody's giving you something that's 10 years old, that's not a really good thing, and you should, alert your regional board, because that document, again, is enforceable, and they can take action upon that. Many people have not updated their SWIPs from the 97 permit, so it is pretty important that if you do go out and you see something that's 5-10 years old, that maybe you do notify your regional board, because there was a lot of new SWIP requirements coming into this new permit. Minimum BMPs. So the minimum BMPs are mostly non-structural, and they're to the extent feasible or as required. These are things like your pollution prevention team, good housekeeping, things like that. They can be structural sometimes, but not. Those are usually a little bit more advanced. They're supposed to be representative of your common practices at your facility. So if you have something that's producing a lot of sand, like how many times do you sweep a week to kind of negate the fact that you have all this sand all over your facility? Or what are you doing to kind of prevent that, if it started raining, to be in your discharge?
I wanted, for the extent feasible, there's language in the actual industrial general permit. Sorry. And it talks about the discharger has to provide an explanation and a description of what they're doing instead. So if it says cover all your stockpile materials and they're unable to do that, or they have a 3-mile long conveyor belt, they can't clean it every day, they have to show what they're doing instead that is just as protective as if they covered or cleaned every day. So they don't just say, well, I'm doing something else. They have to have it in their SWIP, they have to have it documented. And I just wanted to make that comment.
And so, this is the basis of compliance with technology-based effluent limitations and water quality-based receiving water limitations. Lost my train of thought. Okay, we'll just go on. Monitoring for the NOI, they are required to do monthly observations of non-stormwater discharges. They include sampling events. This includes contained stormwater if they have retention or detention ponds that are discharging, if they have overflow. We also have a new definition of a qualifying storm event that is different from the old permit. It is 48 hours of no discharge, and it has to be discharging from at least one location at their facility to be considered a qualifying storm event. The sampling, if you guys want to review this, is XIB in the permit. And just to kind of go over what they're required to sample is you're required to do 2 QSEs from July to December, and then another 2 QSEs from January to June of the reporting period. So if you get 2 in the beginning, if you get 2 in the beginning, you still have to get 2 in the next reporting period. You can't get 4 in the beginning and then say, oh, I'm done sampling. So it is 2 per reporting period. And these come with some rules, as I said, with that QSE definition, 48 hours of no prior precipitation and discharge from at least one drainage area. But it can be during scheduled facility, it has to be during scheduled facility operating hours. We don't require them to go out in the middle of the night and go sample in the dark if it's raining at 12. And we give them a little bit of leeway on when they can get their sample. So the sample should be collected within 4 hours of start of discharge if it's during regular facility operating hours. And if it does start raining in the middle of the night, they have 12 hours from when the discharge started to be able to get that next sample from whatever discharge location is discharging. We have numeric action levels, and this is coming into being a hot topic as we're coming into July with people who will be getting notified if they're level 1 or not yet so far. So I just wanted to kind of give you a brief little background about it. We have 2 types of exceedances in this permit. One is annual and one is instantaneous. I put the definitions up there, but basically the annual is an average per parameter of all of the samples for the year. So if you had 4 samples, it would be all 4 samples added up together divided by 4 for that annual average. And the instantaneous, there's only 3 instantaneous parameters that we have in the permit. They're pH, TSS, and oil and grease. If you exceed any one of those parameters twice, it's considered an instantaneous maximum NAL exceedance, and you would move to level 1 for that parameter. And with the exceedances comes this great qualified industrial stormwater practitioner. So the dischargers will be required to go out and get a QISP. It can be an internal and external type thing. There's no prerequisites to being a QISP, and if you did not know, we did recently roll out the QISP training. It is live as of May 1st. It is definitely not an intro to stormwater training. So we want people who have experience with industrial stormwater or managing a facility to be able to take these so that they can actually help people with their exceedances and get them back down to baseline instead of just letting them go to level 2. So only dischargers with level 1 or level 2 status need a QISP, or people who are a new discharger discharging to a 303D impaired receiving water. The QISP is required to provide certain things for the facility, including ERA reporting and action plans. Those will be dependent upon level 1 or level 2, and the evaluations within those are a little bit different as well. So if you guys have questions about that stuff, you can email me on the site. The new dischargers, as I mentioned, with the 303D impaired water bodies. This is Appendix 3 on the back of the permit. And this is for dischargers who are new and didn't have a site that had previous coverage before. There's a lot of little nuances. This is walked through in SMARTS, and it'll tell them if they need a quiz to come and do an evaluation off of a set of questions that they answer that are yes or no. Dischargers are ineligible for coverage if the parameter of concern is not exposed, not present, or discharged but below a water quality standard. You do require the QISP for this. They should be doing the evaluation to say, hey, it's not here, but we haven't had too many new dischargers within the permit.
No, and it's in the other criteria Rebecca was talking about is that it's a direct discharge to an impaired water body or through a municipal conveyance system that directly discharges their outfall directly discharges to an impaired water body. Really, this permit is introducing this concept, and we have a legal requirement to have an application process that addresses it. We need more training to really evaluate how people are doing on this, and we'll be looking at that in the next permit.
And this is also part of the existing dischargers. They may not need a QISP to do this, but as a part of their annual report, they will be given a checklist of pollutants that are identified within their HUC 10 watershed that they could have the potential to sample for if they discharge within their industrial activities. So that'll be coming up in the annual report if you hear about that. Okay, so now the no exposure, which is what everybody wants to talk about. So we have the NEC checklist is required for registering for the permit documentation. We also require a site map, the application fee, which was $200, as I mentioned before, and again, that electronic authorization form. Again, everything is supposed to be through SMARTS, so if somebody hands you a paper application, we do not accept those. I wanted to go over this portion because I think this would be most important for you as an inspector when you get to a site that says that they have coverage. This is required for both an NOI and an NEC permit coverage. You're supposed to be ensuring that they are pretty site specific and that they're pretty complete. I have laid out the section XE which gives out the minimum sitemap elements. But things that are commonly missing on some of the sitemaps that we see is somebody will give a really big Google Earth picture and say, "Hey, this is my sitemap." What information can you gather from that? It's not really helpful. So, the concept of a vicinity map compared to a site map. They're missing their structural BMPs. If they have a berm, they should be marking that. If they don't have their discharge locations, how are you going to know where they're sampling from? Again, also with the sampling comes the areas that are exposed or not exposed with their industrial materials, and laying out where those things are happening. If I have a forklift maintenance area, that should be laid out. If I'm moving, huge pallets, 4 or 5 times a day, where are those pallets going? What industrial activity could be outside. And most commonly of all is people are missing flow arrows of when it actually rains, where does the stormwater go? Maybe. Okay. And the final type of coverage, which I said was not coverage, is the NONA, which is submitted to show that the industrial general permit requirements do not apply to the facility. This is required to be filed in SMARTS if it is requested of the regional board. I would like to point out that a county inspector cannot require a NONA to be filed, that only a regional board can require a NONA to be filed for this non-applicability thing. And if they do, they can require a no discharge report, or it could be something as simple as saying, "Oh, my SIC code before was applicable, but now we're not doing this anymore. Here's my new SIC code, and it's not, registered under this permit." So there are a couple of different ways to do it, but I just really want to drive the point home that it can only be requested by the water board. So don't be like, "Oh, you guys should apply for a NONA." You might want to point them to your regional board if you think that that is a route that they can take. Existing dischargers that have an NOI or NEC, if they adjust their site to contain their largest event or series of events, they can file a notice of termination with the basis of a NONA, saying that they do not discharge. And here are the big long definitions. And again, I just want to kind of say that these things have to be signed, wet stamped, signed by a professional engineer. So people who are claiming no discharge will need to meet these bullet points saying that they can contain the maximum historic precipitation event or series of events using data from NOAA, or that there will be no discharge of industrial stormwaters to waters of the U.S. This is most applicable in the Lahontan region, parts of region 6 and 7. So some of those are pretty easy, but they have a pretty good handle on that at the regional board. So if they have questions, you can refer them to that. But many people outside of those regions would not meet that criteria of waters of the United States. There are some areas in Fresno that may meet this criteria. Again, those people in Fresno tend to have a handle on that, so please refer them to the regional board. And that would be the facility is located in a basin, so, and not hydrologically connected. But again, if you have questions about it, refer them to the regional boards, because this report from a PE is fairly complicated, and it should be a pretty robust technical report. It's going to require a lot of calculations off of this data. All right, so now the fun stuff. So SMARTS. I don't know if many of you have worked in SMARTS before, but I will be showing you some of the basics of a discharger and some of the tools that you can use as inspectors from our public user menu to help with your inspections. So the purpose of SMARTS is to provide the platform where dischargers and regulators can track all this stormwater data. So we have the NOIs, NECs, notice of terminations, annual reports, compliance and enforcement, and all the monitoring data is housed in this system. as I mentioned before, all of this information is publicly available unless the discharger requests it to be marked as confidential. In either case, the water board is still required to respond to public record requests, so we can provide those information if it is a required portion in an enforcement case. So SMARTs, the regional board members use them to prioritize inspections and tasks. We look at trends in the data to see, who's discharging what and where it's coming from, what types of activities we have enrolled in the permit. And SMARTs is EPA approved, so we're CROMAIR approved, which means that we ensure the authenticity and integrity of the electronic documents and electronic signatures received. I want to point out that SMARTs is a self-certification system. So all the information that is being inputted is being input from dischargers. So you need to be aware of that. That maybe some of it is not as accurate as it could be. So you need to be wary when entering addresses and stuff like that. And we run in Internet Explorer 11. Hopefully we will be able to expand that platform soon. But until then, you will get a lot of errors if you're not using anything besides Internet Explorer. So this is our SMARTS homepage. I have put the link up there if you did not know it before. And if you determine that somebody does need coverage, we have a couple of documents that you can point them to, but I'll just walk you through new user registration and point you out some of the features that we have within our page. So we do have a new user registration get started button, which is located right on our main screen. It'll take them to a page that displays a couple of different things. So SMARTS doesn't just house industrial general permit. It houses the construction general permit. It houses MS4, Caltrans, Region 8 scrap metal permit, and a few others. So for this presentation, I focused on the industrial so that I could show you what types of information we have. They have information that would help them with their eligibility determination. We have the SIC code video that Laurel has created that is there. We also have the SIC code book there now. There's a couple help guides in our industrial general permit program page, and most importantly, a link to the permit, which hopefully they will review before starting. But once they're all ready, they can hit new user. And like I said before, we have these dischargers guides, and I know myself personally am working very diligently to try to put out more very useful, user-friendly help guides to be able to get everybody to get all these functions completed in SMARTS. So far, right now, we have a NOI, NEC, and NONA guide, how to apply within that. We have a ad hoc guide, which is how you enter data. We also have a change of information guide and a notice of termination guide. So if you do end up getting, somebody who needs something like that, you can point them to our page, our industrial program page, and it has all these links for all these guides. So this is what I think will be most useful to you guys. Here is the public user menu. It is directly below our SMARTS login screen. And all you would do is select view stormwater data, and it'll bring up these search options. So I thought I put a box on it, but so if you select the first one, which is search for owners, operators, sites, or facilities, this is probably going to be the most useful to you. I just wanted to give a couple of tips and tricks for this. When entering, as I said before, dischargers enter the information into this website. So when searching, less is more. A discharger could say, for example, they are on North Test Street. If they write N Test ST and you write out North Test Street, they're not going to show up in the same record within SMARTS, and you're not going to get any results. So they may say they have a permit, and you're like, whoa, I'm searching and I'm putting in your address, but I'm not finding you, it's because it's not an exact match. So I suggest for counties and cities to break it down by either your county or your city. We have the regional boards you can select for. Try different combinations, enter your city, maybe enter the region, maybe try an SIC code. If you're specifically looking for, say, auto dismantlers, you could put in 5015 and Rancho Cordova, and a whole bunch of them would pop up. So these are really important, but the best tool if you're looking for one specific facility is if you know that WDID or that application ID, you can enter it up in the top. It'll take you to the site, and you can view all of the attachments that have been uploaded to this facility. We also have, there's a box on this one. Okay, so we also have the stormwater reports for industrial. Here you can see a list of the non-filers, people who have filed for the notice of non-applicability. It has the sampling data, monitoring data. You can pull it up by parameter and some of the numbers. And then you could also search for annual reports for that year and any prior years that were entered electronically. If you're looking for annual report data besides that, you should talk to your regional board and you could request to view those for specific sites. But some may be in this system already because some people were entering data in Smarts before that. The overview reports basically give a regional breakdown. It'll give you the counts of NOIs and NECs in an area, notas in an area, how many enforcement actions they've taken against certain sites or certain areas. It'll go over inspections, and if there's an inspection report attached, you may be able to view those if they're not in pending investigations, and violations that have occurred. And so a couple of take-home things for you guys. This is a notice of intent hints. Just things that if people tell you they have a notice of intent, what you should be looking for. You know, do they have a SWIP? Is it up to date? You know, like I said, that 5-10 year date is definitely not valid. Can they provide you a WDID? Do they have a monitoring implementation plan? Are they maintaining their records on site? Can they even provide you the records? Are they doing best management practices? Are they addressing spills, leaks, all that type of thing? Unauthorized non-stormwater discharges. Are their dumpsters out and exposed? Are they covered? What's the condition of what's going on outside? Things to look at, roof vents, and most importantly, is the site map accurate? Can you actually walk the site with the site map provided and understand what's going on at their facility? So this is just like a little checklist that if you guys want to use it, you kind of see the key points within a notice of intent. And similarly, here's one for the no exposure certification. So, again, industrial materials exposed to precipitation. If they have anything exposed outside to precipitation, they automatically are disqualified for this no exposure certification. So that is really, really big. What types of activities are they doing outside? Spills, leaks, residual things. You can see maybe if there was a prior oil spill, if they actually cleaned it. You know, is there runoff coming from their roof that's staining, a white stain on a black concrete? Those types of things that you should be looking for to see if they actually would qualify. Reagan will definitely go over some of these. And again, roof vents will maintain vehicles. These are all part of the NEC instructions, which are in the permit. I think it's attachment G. No, appendix 2. Sorry, appendix 2. And again, site map. So after giving you some key points on the site map, if you guys want to review that section, it is in these presentation slides where to look. And so we have some important upcoming dates. As I mentioned prior, the May 1st QUISP training rolled out. If you guys are interested in doing that, you can visit Office of Water Programs website and enroll. I think it is $475 for the training. and it's an online portion. It has an online section. You'll go through, take a midterm, go to a trainer of record for the IGP, take that class, and then go in and take a final exam to get your QISP certificate. And if you are a professional engineer, professional geologist, there also is a fast track CB Pelzig way to claim that you have that knowledge of the QISP and you can practice as that under your CB Pelzig license number. And July 15th, as I mentioned before, the annual report is due in SMARTS, and we will be calculating level 1 exceedances July 1, actually. So dischargers will be getting emails about that. October 1, we have recertification of the NEC, and the level 1 ERA reports or evaluations should be completed, and the level 1 report will be due January 1, 2017. And I know this is a lot, so hopefully you guys got the PDF of the slides. I wanted to provide some resources for you guys if you had any questions about any of the industrial program. We have all of this beautiful information on our website. Here's the link for SMARTS, our industrial stormwater program page, some of the help guides that would be most useful to some of the dischargers that you go out and talk to. We also have a couple deliverables if you guys wanted to bring them to the site with you. We do have an NOI to-do list. It is in English and Spanish. You can print that out and provide that to the discharger, and it'll go over, what the permit is, what the timeline should be. And it was supposed to be an effort before the permit rolled out, but it is still very useful information. And it does go over that everything should be done in SMARTS, so it's still pretty useful. But again, English and Spanish. We also have an NEC brochure, also in English and Spanish, and this goes over what the NEC is, and it goes over the 11 checklist items that are required to be able to certify for this no exposure condition. Again, that's PDF, so you can print those and bring those as well. And this is a little bit of a bonus, but this is going to be going into something pretty big pretty soon. So this is GreenGov, and I've provided the link. So if you guys want to get to it and play around in it, the water boards are working with the GovOps to establish open data for the NPDES programs, all programs within water boards. And so it'll host a whole bunch of different agencies. You can select water, you can select recycle, you can select any type of data, and it'll give you all of these things as a visualization. You can pull up maps, you can do charts, you can look at all of this data together and pull it in from different places to kind of make your own set. And so we're going to hope to have our own portal in the future. That's just water boards. But for now, it has everything. And we have already integrated stormwater inspections, violations, and enforcements from SMARTS into this GreenGov. So I did a little test on it. And, I thought I had switches, but you can plot an area and select industrial facilities or construction facilities or Caltrans projects and plot them out on a map, and it'll give you a couple of key points of information, their address, their GPS, what's going out, so you can use it to plan inspections. It'll also have more the enforcement stuff, so you can see who's violated where in the past. And if you guys have any questions about this or any of the data, you can contact Charlotte, and I put her name on there, and she is very eager for feedback. So if you guys do go on this site, please let her know how you feel about it. If what you think would be beneficial to add into something else, what you would like to see in the future. If something's not working, they're trying to constantly update this. So this is a really cool project that's coming up. And for all your stormwater needs, please contact the help desk, stormwater@waterboards.ca.gov. Our telephone number is on there. We are accepting voicemails and calls. You could also fax us, but I don't think that's ever happened. So, yeah. Here's a couple of stormwater program contacts. If you have really large public report requests or huge data dumps that you need, you can request these from Patrick. Here's Patrick's email. And most importantly, I think that I really want to get across is that you guys can talk to your regional boards. They, may point out a couple areas that they're lacking in or that they could use some help with, that maybe you guys can be the eyes and ears out there. So I've put our regional board, state water board contacts program page for stormwater. It has the lead staff for every regional board and state board, and who you should contact, and they will either direct you to the appropriate staff or help you out. So I know most of them are very, very willing and would be really thankful for this help. So there's that. And here's our contacts at State Board. There's myself. I answer lots of phone calls and emails all day long. If you guys want to call and talk to me about it, feel free. Here's my email. We also have Reagan's email. And if you can't get to either of us, then you can go to Laurel. But most of the time, if you email Laurel, they still come back to us. So, yeah. But there you go. So you got all kinds of time for questions because my presentation's kind of
Thanks,
big.
Rebecca. I wanted to add something for those that on the smarts aspect and kind of querying as a brief tip. If you're a municipality or a county and you wanted to look at kind of who's in my, she mentioned some great tips about keeping less is more in there and how that works. But I've also found in looking at that information, it has the ability, once you've less is more and you've gotten the long list or multiple pages, you can export it to Excel. And it's a pretty nice feature because once it's in Excel, it gives you the ability to like sort your columns. So if you happen to know maybe a certain component of the name of the discharge or somebody, or you're looking to list and inventory those in your system, exporting it out into Excel is a great little tip and trick to help kind of categorize those users and dischargers within your areas.
Yeah, you can easily sort, NOI versus NEC versus NONA, doing that. If you just want to say that you want all of Region 5's data, you can sort it, you can request all that data and then sort it out however you want to prioritize what you're going around and looking at. So, yeah.
I had another, I wanted to weigh in on what Rebecca was talking about when it's dischargers enter the data. So there's a misconception sometimes that we approve at State Board all the documents the dischargers enter, and right now we don't have the capacity to approve site maps and SWIPs and say, yes, these are compliant with the permit. We accept them so that they can get an application. So I just wanted to make sure, we're on the same page, that we don't approve the document. So if a discharger says, oh, this was already approved, no, it was accepted, but you have some more work to do on the SWIP or site map.
Oh, and we have a microphone, so if you guys could please hold on, then everybody on the webcast can hear what your questions are.
If I have a specific task that I query, let's say once a month, once a week, is there an avenue for me to pursue to get that task automated and potentially just have that data set emailed to me?
No. Oh, potentially in GreenGov, yes, but Smarts does not have that capability currently. But GreenGov may have that capability in the future. And if you want to email Charlo, you could definitely talk to her about that. They would be more than willing. They're very interested in what people want.
Yeah, I have two questions. One on the averaging of the data. Does Smarts do that automatically, or is there an opportunity for flow-weighted or area-weighted averages?
If you're doing the flow-weighted or area-weighted averages, it is noted in the permit that you should be uploading those calculations. But Smarts will run an average of the entered sample results that are from, it meets criteria A through Z. It has to be a QSE. It has to be within the reporting period and that type of stuff. But Smarts will run that data to provide the exceedance calculation, and on July 1 it'll run, and then it'll say, hey, this discharger's in level 1.
So that's regardless of whether you did a flow or.
Yeah, so
area rating.
it'll just be based on what was entered into those ad hoc reports.
Are you doing pH using the flow weighting?
Are you doing pH using flow weighting?
I don't know. It's not my question.
Okay,
Oh.
so the point is if you do flow weighting, you should be entering your average from your flow weighting analysis. What would that average be? And you'd be entering that per discharge location, or setting up an average. You can set up a monitoring location just for the flow weighting that you're doing.
Yeah.
But the pH, if you go beyond the 15-minute for your flow weighting or however you're doing your composites, you may not be able to do it for pH, so you'd still be having pH as grab samples.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at. So there's a way to enter your average that you've calculated and upload your calculations like Rebecca said, and then that would be your number. We should be getting one number from your calculations for the flow weighting is what I'm getting at,
Gotcha.
other
Yeah.
than for pH.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have been that.
Yeah.
What you are calculating is entered into Smarts, and then
Okay.
Smarts takes that and runs the calculation
Correct.
for the
So,
exceedance.
just one other question. If you're in a basin that's not hydrologically connected to waters of the U.S., does the discharger have to automatically file a NONA, or it's only at the request of the regional board?
It's at the request of the regional board. They're not required unless the regional board approaches them.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, and that's in the fact sheet of the industrial permit. It cites the water code where we have the non-applicability criteria, and it says 30 days after a regional board representative requests you to file your determination of why you don't need coverage. That would be where they'd ask for the report, or you can self-report the NONA anytime you want. Yeah.
So I had a question. Sorry. So at times there could be like for instance, queries with people that are non-filers or haven't submitted their annual reports. So sometimes you get numbers that can range up to even like, I don't know, 200 non-filers and, people that haven't submitted their annual reports. So from my understanding, an administrator can actually do a batch query and do a batch violations report with this. But then there is a specific issue that's sort of arising, and it's just that then you got to upload these individual letters, every single one by hand.
Yes.
And so will there be a potential automated sort of system in the future that can potentially upload all these letters all at once instead of having to do them all one by one, which can take more than 10 hours at times?
Yeah, I definitely know that working from the Region 5S. We did do that individually. The functionality is currently not there, and I don't know if it will be anytime soon, but we have talked about it.
When you ask a question, I think we're gonna have people say their names. So who are the people who asked? What was your name, sir?
Sorry, my name is William Chen, and I'm from Region 6.
Region 6. Yeah. So one of the things with the automated letters is all the regions would have to kind of decide and approve a template letter so that it would just generate the letter automatically. We're open to doing that work together, but we would have to do that not for this training.
Yeah, it's an offline thing, and it would have to be
It's a
agreed upon,
collaboration, yeah.
by all of the regions, not just a few.
Correct.
Any other questions? Wow, I had lots of questions in that one.
I checked on the web and I didn't see any chat-in questions. I will keep checking my email for that. If you're on the web, just feel free to email me your questions at that email address. We'll put it up during the break. We're going to take a break. We're a little early, which is great. Rachel, what was your consulting company? Oh, Cash Environmental. So Cash Environmental sponsored a coffee service out in the hallway. Be very careful with any coffee in this break room. It's really bad if you spill anything. So please do not spill. If you bring that back in here, I will be fired. No. Yeah, right?
that's gonna be way too close. I'll end up smacking myself. We can probably put it back where it was here, like this. And okay, so I'll just have to. Are these silent now or? All right, welcome back, everybody. Our next session today, for those, I believe our webcast is on too, but our next session here to talk about is going to be the industrial activities subject to the industrial general permit. These activities ultimately are outlined, and they're based primarily on SIC code. They're in Attachment A of the Industrial General Permit. It applies to 9 categories. We're going to go through in the next few slides here and talk about each of those categories a little more in depth. The Industrial General Permit does apply to facilities with industrial activities and materials, whether they are primary or auxiliary activities and functions at the same facility, and stormwater discharges that are commingled. And we'll talk a little bit about that more later on in the sessions. These are the 9 categories of Attachment A. I won't read through each of these, but we're going to go into them in depth in the next few slides. (40 CFR) subchapter N. This is the first category of Attachment A, and this basically establishes technology-based federal stormwater effluent limitation guidelines for industrial categories. Currently, there is only 12 of 40 established ELGs for industrial dischargers. This will include additional parameter monitoring as well as effluent limits and/or pretreatment standards by individual industrial categories. One thing to note with this, and I do want to point out, Attachment F of this permit goes into each of these 12 categories specifically. It has the effluent limits, it has the pretreatment standards, the additional guidelines and requirements, such as if you have your standard, and I'll talk about this in the next slide a little bit, but if you have your standard base parameters according to the IGP, pH, TSS, oil, and grease, these 40 subchapter N, CFR subchapter N requirements will have ELGs potentially for those base parameters and or additional monitoring parameters that each facility must look at. And I'll talk, we'll go through one example here as specifically so that you can see what that means. These are all the categories listed here. And as I mentioned before, these are covered in Attachment F. The permit actually, the digital version of the permit is rather nice. If you click on the links in Attachment F, it'll take you right to the 40 CFR requirements specifically for each of these categories. It will discuss the applicability, the actual effluent limits, pretreatment standards. In some cases, the applicability may be different depending on the actual industrial type of activities that facility is doing. So it oftentimes requires a little in-depth reading and information by going through that. A couple I wanted to point out here we'll talk about more is an example with some uniqueness is the 419, Part 419, which is petroleum refining point source. This particular category, for example, would have pretreatment standards for new sources, which would include oil and grease, ammonia, and total chromium. Also, the 443 part, which is paving and roofing materials, tars and asphalts, dealing with the production side of those, would also include things like pretreatment standards for new sources and applicable parameter monitoring for BOD, TSS, pH, and oil and grease, which would include limits and or mass loading requirements. One of the items with Part 419 and 443 is if you have these types of sources for new sources of these categories, you must estimate and calculate the volume of those industrial stormwater discharges for each drainage area, and those calculations must be completed and signed off on by a professional engineer. This is an example, landfills, which is Part 445 as identified previously. I wanted to use this just as, it's a pretty standard example. It comes up more often than some of those other categories as far as industrial discharges covered. This particular category, landfills, will have your base parameters as identified in the IGP, which is pH, TSS, oil, and grease. But in addition, it will have effluent limitation guidelines and limits for the following parameters: ammonia is N, BOD, arsenic, chromium, zinc, naphthalene, phenol, aniline, benzoic acid, and peak cresol. In addition, this particular category is kind of unique, as most are aware. The IGP has your baselines, as I mentioned, but if your SIC code, and in this case a landfill is 4953 for refuse systems, that also has a table in there which would include additional applicable parameters. So this is a good example in which you've got your baseline parameters, pH, TSS, oil and grease, these additional 40 CFR subchapter N parameters and limits, and then you also have the additional monitoring of iron based on the SIC code for that category. This includes Part 445 is applicable to both RCRA Subtitle C and RCRA Subtitle D landfills, which is haz waste and non-haz waste landfills. The next category, which is item number 2 of attachment A, is manufacturing facilities. As you can see here, this covers the following SIC codes. And I'm not going to go through each of these. We're going to talk a little more in depth specifically about wineries and breweries and the printing and publishing manufacturing types of facilities and their SIC codes a little more detail later in the session. The next category of attachment A for coverage under the industrial general permit is oil and gas and mining facilities. This includes both active and inactive mining operations. As you can see here, it may be coal mining, it may be oil and gas based. I wanted to point out in the mining, active or inactive, most of the industrial activities covered deal with stormwater runoff, precipitation contact with overburden, final products, waste products, byproducts. One exception in the coal mining realm is that if that particular facility has already received a reclamation and performance bond, had that released, they likely would not be applicable under the IGP. And some of that can be a case-by-case basis, but which you could work with the regional boards on. Oil and gas facilities, they are covered only if they've had a reportable quantity discharge. If they have had that, some of those types of facilities that would be covered might include production, processing, storage, and disposal activities of oil and gas, well pads, tank batteries. Those are examples. The next, well, this is some additional SIC codes under the item 3, which is the mining. Under metal mining, I just wanted to highlight here in this slide what types of industrial activities and what associated SIC codes would be included with the metal mining, which can include ore mining and dressing. So these are typical SIC codes you would be associated with that would require coverage under the industrial general permit. Coal mining, here's also an example of the associated SIC codes based on coal mining related facilities. 1221 to 1241. Mineral mining and dressing. Once again, I wanted to highlight just what some of the SIC codes associated with mineral mining and dressing are. These are listed here. And we're going to talk about a little bit more on where you can look these up through the OSHA SIC code website and the manual and information about these, but this is just a breakdown of these typical SIC codes within item 3 of attachment A for IGP coverage. The next coverage item is item 4 out of the 9, and this deals with hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal facilities that are covered. Please note this may include those that are operating under interim status or a permit under a subtitle C of RCRA, which is hazardous waste landfills also. That's a pretty unique individual category, only applies to those types of facilities. Item 5 deals with landfills, land application sites, open dumps facilities. These includes all of them except some solid waste landfill areas that have been physically closed, and that closure criteria identified by this 40 CFR requirement here, 258.6, would include things at that landfill that it has met, minimizing infiltration, minimizing erosion. It has submitted a notice of termination requirements and achieved like the 70% uniform cover rule. The next item out of the 9 is item number 6 in attachment A. This is recycling facilities. It deals with this, these two specifically SIC codes. There's quite a few of these, as most of you probably would know in your communities and municipalities. 5015 is your motor vehicle parts. 5093 your scrap and waste materials. As I've listed here, a couple examples of your salvage yards, auto part recyclers, scrap and waste recycling facilities, battery reclaimers, and there may be others, but those are some typical examples. And item 7 out of the 9 in attachment A deals with steam electric power generating facilities. I wanted to note specifically it's unique with these facilities because it only real industrial activities that are covered under the IGP is only addressed with the coal storage piles and handling sites and any potential exposure and runoff from those. So it's not always the entire facility. As you can see here in this photograph on the slide, off to the right of the power plant itself, you can see the large coal pile. That would be an example of where the facility would be covered under the IGP for stormwater runoff in contact with that aspect. Item 8 out of the 9 is transportation facilities. These are, once again, some of the list of the SIC codes and descriptions based on transportation facilities covered under the IGP. I do want to note that the transportation facilities does exclude the SIC codes 4221 to 4225. That was on the first slide here. That actually is included in the manufacturing facilities. So you do not see those ones in here. There's that gap as you look down the list. Even our Postal Service has their own unique SIC code for coverage under the IGP. I want to point out with the 5171 SIC code, this would include industrial facilities that have wholesale distribution of things like crude petroleum, petroleum products, including liquefied petroleum gas or bulk liquid storage facilities. The 4212 to 4231, which is listed as motor freight transportation here, we'll discuss more of that in detail with some examples later in the session. And the last category of attachment A is sewage or wastewater treatment works facilities. These are going to be facilities that store, treat, or recycle greater than or equal to 1 million gallons per day or have an approved pretreatment program. So you could have less than 1 million gallons per day, but if you have an approved pretreatment program, you would likely be covered under attachment A of the permit. This will include even facilities that have sewage sludge disposal as long as it's within the confines of this facility. It does have some exclusions such as farmlands, domestic gardens, beneficial reuse applications, kind of more on that agricultural side. We have some resources I wanted to point out on industrial sectors here, and I'll pull this up on the slide. So that you can see this. These are fact sheets that EPA has developed for 29 industrial sectors, and I'll pull this up for everyone to look at briefly. So as you can see here, I'll go through these. The 29 sectors are listed, and we'll open one up here just for reference. So the useful part about this, I'll scroll down for those benefit. Sorry, I'm switching mics here. The useful part about these is that they include a lot of information about the specific category. This one's relating to the scrap recycling waste facilities, which are covered in the IGP. But these fact sheets can be useful. It includes types of pollutants you may see at these facilities, what types of activities that would be exposed or potentially outdoors, and why they would be covered under the IGP. It also will include items about BMPs. As you can see here, it talks about if you're dealing with combustion engines, you'd have potential for spills, leaks, particulate matter, oils, greases. Those are your pollutants of concern. Vehicle maintenance, similar issues with waste products, exposure, fluids. And further down, it actually takes, these are just common activities. I will get to, it goes through both auto and scrap and recycling. The next section within these fact sheets that's fairly useful is it talks about the typical BMP practices that you would expect to see for these types of pollutants and concerns at these facilities. And I believe it actually goes, yeah, they even provide a checklist in here. So if you're at a scrap waste recycling facility that has its non-source separated, non-liquid materials, at the inbound location at that facility, these are the types of BMPs you might expect to see. And what to look for if you're going out to look at one of these facilities. If you're inspecting a facility like this at your location, I mean, this is not a comprehensive list, it's guidance, it's a fact sheet, but it's fairly informative and fairly detailed overall. And this discusses each of the various activities that you may see. So, and this is just one of the 29 categories that they have developed these fact sheets for. So this is a useful tool for those that are looking at these types of facilities and wondering, well, what types of pollutants of concern might I see? What types of BMPs should I maybe see there in the facility? And it's not a bad reference for evaluating these types of facilities. Let's see what else is in here. I believe at the end. They do have some additional references, and as they talk about up front, if you do have activities that are exposed, you may be covered. If you don't, we talked about that a little earlier as far as whether you would be covered under potential no discharge or working with the regional boards individually on actual permit coverage. Typically for this example, that's not the case with scrap yards, recycling facilities. All right, any questions?
Hi, my name is Katie McCoy with Kennedy Jenks Consultants, and I had a question on one of your earlier slides where you listed all of the sections of activities covered, and there's an additional one at the end for feedlots.
Okay. What was the question on that?
You had a slide for all of the other items, but not one for feedlots.
That is probably an oversight.
I can speak on that issue a little bit.
Okay.
We do cover feedlots under the IGP. It's just that in the subchapter N, effluent limitation guidelines, there aren't any effluent limits really for the stormwater. What the subchapter N deals with is commingled stormwater with the process wastewaters that occur on feedlots, like when it mixes with manure and hay and all that stuff. It says that you can discharge, or your pond can overflow if you design it for a 25-year, 24-hour storm event. So that's kind of the effluent limit that they have for that one. So that's why it's only included in this one part and not in the rest of it.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
we looked at the permit and the subchapter and interaction at the time, we didn't see them carving stormwater out explicitly. But when you read it, it does mention stormwater. So if you did go to a facility and you found that there was stormwater, potentially contact stormwater going out the back of the facility and not to their pond, there are definitely implications for that. We do cover feedlots in this permit over a certain number of animals, which is defined in the federal regulations. We have a lot of dairies in the permit, and we have some of the confined animal feeding operations. So they are pulled into stormwater that way. Thank you, Reagan.
Am I even on? And one further clarification is certain regional boards have regional permits respective to feedlot, dairy, CAFO activities with industrial stormwater elements written into that program. So that is another regulatory mechanism.
Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, Amy Phillips with El Dorado County. I was wondering if you guys could provide a little clarification, your expectations for county municipal corporation yards. If their primary focus is storage and maintenance of fleet vehicles, do they require the coverage?
It's kind of region specific.
Well, and it may be with, I mean, are you talking
Hold
about
on.
they include the SIC code? Would they fall under attachment A?
Yeah, for the transportation.
Okay, they'd fall under the transportation SIC code?
We don't know. We're kind of confused on that, so
Okay.
just hoping for some clarification.
So at the corporation yard, that you have to be doing a defined industrial activity is listed in attachment A. Sorry, I'm kind of hiding behind the podium. So you have to be doing something that you can draw a line around in its primary activity of that location at the corp yard. So there is no SIC code just for a municipal corporation yard. It's auxiliary to your functioning as a city until you start doing a primary industrial activity defined in the permit, like school bus maintenance. You have a school bus maintenance bay, or you primarily maintain school buses at a maintenance bay. That turns into a primary area. Garbage truck washing or repairing. If you have an area defined for garbage trucks and you have enough of them coming in, and it's not a commingled thing with police cars and city inspector cars, and you do garbage truck washing or maintenance, that is a transportation SIC code under 4212. It's the transportation without storage. So you have to be doing a defined activity at the corporation yard. Regions do have the authority to designate a facility. They can go through their management process to get a facility designated or a sector if there is a real problem at the site.
I also want to clarify that corp yards are not necessarily covered under the IGP. They are covered under the municipal phase 1 or phase 2. And so those activities would be covered under that permit as well, potentially.
Any other question?
Hi, Rachel Kish. I was actually just going to say that this year's site assessments and designation of hotspots of specifically municipal corporate yards and the requirements, at least in the phase 2 permit on the non-traditional, I think also the traditional sides, cover that specific request. And I think very similar requirements on the phase 1 side. So I think that the corporate yards are adequately addressed with those inspections and requirements for the stormwater management plans for hotspots under those permits. And it'd be, like you said, of course, Laurel, the specific use of the site, but otherwise a normal corp yard, it shouldn't be under this permit.
And I also want to mention too, for further clarification, if you have the SIC code and you go to and we're going to show this a little later in the session, you actually go to that core group and category and punch it in, it'll talk about some of the specific activities and things that are covered under that SIC code and what you might expect. So that may be of use, because each site could be a little different depending on whether those activities are, as she mentioned, primary, auxiliary, indoor, exposed, things like that.
It gets back to the primary economic activity or primary activity of the establishment. So if there is a primary, you have the larger facility, and Reagan's going to talk about this, and then you drill down to you can define a facility inside that larger area. It could be that is an actual primary activity if it's defined in attachment A. That's why the school buses get pulled in. It comes from some guidance from 1992, as well as the garbage truck maintenance. There's a direct SIC code for that. So
Thanks, Laurel, for the clarification. Any other questions? Okay, next session, Reagan's going to talk about the use of the SIC code system. So this will probably discuss some more of those questions. Thank you.
I don't know which one I want to use. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about SIC. No, it's not on. All right, I'm going to. Maybe I will use this one. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use the SIC codes. Is most everybody familiar with SIC codes? Yes. Okay, and Laurel doesn't know anything about them, but this presentation will be very similar to one that's already posted on our webpage that Laurel did previously, but I thought it was important to include it in this training. Sorry, I'm switching mics. Okay, so I want to start with a couple of references. Right here we have the OSHA, U.S. Department of Labor's SIC code lookup online tool. So this tool is really helpful because you can look up per SIC code, like you type in .5015. That is, and this describes what 5015 is. This is vehicle dismantlers. And so it gives a little description down here of what's contained in the 5015 SIC code. And it also talks about, it also has links to the major groups. So major group 50. You want to look at these as well as the specific SIC code. They're pretty important. So these are all the different SIC codes included in the 50 major group. And under the industrial permit, we only cover 5093 and 5015. 5093 is the recyclers, just general recycling.
yeah, the SIC code manual covers every type of activity, industrial activity that exists, more or less. And so we only cover a portion of those in the attachment A, and those are the ones that require coverage. So what Reagan's showing you is the whole book in an electronic format. So you'll find SIC codes in there. It doesn't mean they need a permit. It's just the whole book.
Right, correct. And then you also want to read through the division descriptions. They're very important, and I'll show you why in just a second. But see, there's a whole long description of what falls in this division of wholesale trade. So this is a good tool. It basically has everything that's in the manual in here, except maybe the preamble. I don't know. I haven't checked. No preamble? They say no preamble. But you would like, it'd be good for you to read that too. And I'll show you another resource where you can find that. You can also do searches like scrap metal recycling. or scrap metal that falls under the 5093. So if you're unsure about what SIC code, something falls under, you can do a little. I had to do something for one of the board members on almonds. I had to find all the SIC codes that applied to almonds. So this thing was really helpful in that exercise.
Hey Reagan, I wanted to point out too, as you can see these search results here, so you'd want to cross-reference these with the section I just talked about previously, where attachment A has the 9 categories, because as you can see under scrap metal, there's a lot of additional SIC codes, and as he mentioned, this is a all-inclusive code manual. You want to take these from your search or your code and compare that to attachment A of the IGP
Yes.
for the coverage.
How many people have used this tool before?
Oh, so a
You
lot
guys
of
are
people.
A plus.
Yeah. Okay, well then I'll just shut this down already. All right. So if using the SIC code or the OSHA lookup, be careful. And I already mentioned it's very important to read the division descriptions. And I'll get to that also in a second. We also have the book. We got permission from the White House to PDF the 1987 SIC code manual, and it's located on the State Water Board's webpage here, and we can look at that real quick. So here's the whole manual, and here's the preface that I would suggest everyone to read through, or in the preamble. But see, it describes all the major groups, the divisions, just like on the online lookup tool. So this little introduction is important too. But how many people are familiar with the physical book? Okay. So they're both helpful to use. Okay, I'm going to talk about a few examples now. We're going to talk a little bit about major group 42. It's technically concerned transportation, motor freight transportation, and warehousing. And in particular, we're going to discuss SIC code 4225, which is general warehousing and storage. And the SIC code book describes it as establishments primarily engaged in the general warehousing and storage of a general line of goods. The warehousing of goods at foreign trade zones is classified in Industrial Code 4226. Field warehousing is classified in Services Industry 7389. So that's verbatim from the manual. And here is an example of why it's important to read the division descriptions. So for these 42 SIC code facilities that are generally considered warehousing facilities, this little division description explains that if they are establishments classified in this division, that they service the general public or other business enterprises, which establishes and furnishes similar services only to other establishments of the same enterprise, they're classified as auxiliary, and that means they don't need to get permit coverage. So, however, if they have a long-distance trucking and they do vehicle maintenance on site, then it's no longer considered an auxiliary facility. It would fall under the SIC code of the long-distance trucking and vehicle maintenance SIC code. So I'm going to go through a few little exercises. Here's an example, Long's Drug Stores. They have a general warehouse. They don't do any long-distance trucking. So they don't cover multiple other major cities, and there's no vehicle maintenance. Does anybody out there think they know what this applies to? What SIC code would be applicable, if any?
Basically, do they need coverage if that's what their operation is?
Well, that's good because they don't have any long distance trucking and it's considered auxiliary or part of the retail business. So generally the warehousing falls under these four main categories. It's an auxiliary facility, functions as a secondary to the primary SIC code, or it falls under the transportation warehousing SIC code where it has the long distance trucking and they do warehousing as a business. So they warehouse for other clients and there's different lines of goods. It could be just be one client, but their warehousing is generally the business that they have.
Yeah, there's a big difference between warehousing your own goods and being paid to warehouse other goods. And when you're getting paid as a storage facility, you're the 422s. And then if you have exposure, you have to get the permit or the NOI, and if you don't have exposure, you get the NEC. And what Reagan's talking about with the long distance, you have to primarily be doing long distance. And what they define long distance as is your trucks primarily go to multiple cities outside of where the facility is located. So most of your trucks, your company's in LA, and they truck things mainly to Redding, mainly to San Diego, outside of that contiguous municipal area. So that's what that division description gets at. And what Reagan's talking about here is how complicated these SIC codes get really quick.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we can get the discussion
So that's
started.
why we're going to go through a couple of exercises. So you guys were correct. It doesn't need permit coverage because it would generally be either auxiliary or part of a retail function, which is similar to the auxiliary. It wouldn't be wholesale trade or any of these SIC codes and numbers. So the next one is the business gets paid to store products from manufacturers in Nevada. Does anybody have an idea of what that falls under? General warehousing? 4225? All right, so we go through this little exercise again. Does it function secondary to another primary SIC code? Or is there long distance trucking? Nothing was mentioned about that in the slide. Do they own the materials? Do they distribute to customers long distance trucking? It didn't say whether they own the materials. It said they were storing the business is paid to store products from manufacturers in Nevada. So, and that wouldn't be retail, obviously. So yeah, so they would probably fall under the 4225 general warehousing SIC code because they're storing another company's goods and it's not their own material. It's not their own line of goods and there's no vehicle maintenance or long distance trucking. Next example, the business buys products from multiple manufacturers in Nevada, stores the products purchased, and has customer orders for the materials. No long distance trucking or vehicle maintenance. Does anybody have any suggestions on what this would fall under? Okay, so the business buys products from multiple manufacturers, so they own the goods, they bought it. They store the purchased products and have customer orders for the materials. No long distance trucking or vehicle maintenance. So under this this exercise, to me, it would appear to be wholesale trade because they own the materials and they distribute to customers, and there's no long distance trucking or vehicle maintenance.
And if they were doing the vehicle maintenance, they would fall under the transportation sectors that aren't the warehousing ones. They'd fall under long distance trucking or local trucking, whatever they're doing with the trucks that they're doing vehicle maintenance on that are actually transporting goods. That also can get a little complicated depending on the site.
Yeah, but that's the only case where an auxiliary facility or a wholesale trade facility would have to get coverage, is if they do maintenance on the vehicles. Can you hold on, Bob, for the microphone? We talked about that. Huh? You want to talk about it? You want to answer? Okay.
This is Bob Ditto from Region 5, Sacramento. Can you clarify the long distance trucking and vehicle maintenance? So if I were a general warehouser with local trucking and did vehicle maintenance, does that make a difference?
So if you do, are you storing your own goods or somebody else's goods?
I'm storing someone else's goods.
So you'd be for one of the warehousing storage ones. If they are required to get coverage because they're warehousing other people's goods, if they're doing any vehicle maintenance, they have to have that in their stormwater pollution prevention plan. Now, if you have the case where a facility is warehousing their own goods, so they wouldn't require permit coverage from that, and they only do local trucking, that's auxiliary to their operation and they wouldn't need coverage. They would fall under the local municipal ordinances. We have to have a trigger for them to need coverage, and if they're not primarily doing long distance trucking, they consider the maintenance auxiliary to the activity.
Yeah, that goes back to this division description. So separate establishments primarily engaged in long distance trucking and have vehicle maintenance are the ones that would need coverage.
Right. So just to clarify, when you were talking about long distance trucking or vehicle maintenance, they were together. So you could
And.
actually have vehicle maintenance.
Vehicle
Correct.
maintenance and long distance
Yeah.
trucking.
Okay.
If a wholesale trade, so you're storing your own goods and you just did long distance trucking, you'd be potentially like IKEA. And you most of the time you don't need a permit unless you're doing that vehicle maintenance and the long distance trucking. Thank you for the good question.
And this is in reference to warehouses. But if you have a separate facility that does local trucking as their practice, then that would be a local trucking business. And so this is just in concern with these warehousing facilities.
Yeah, if your primary activity is local trucking and you're working on the trucks, you need a permit.
Yeah.
Hang on, we have one more question.
Thank you. I had two questions. One is on this slide. For something to need a permit, it has to have everything that's in the box.
No, these are just things to consider.
Okay. And who determines the SIC code?
It's ultimately the discharger who applies for coverage for our permit. It is the discharger. By penalty of perjury, they certify and submit that everything is true and all that in SMARTS when they submit their application, their NOI application, or NEC.
So for MS4s, we get business licenses, and for us, someone in the city actually assigns that code. So that's
well-
what we look at, and it may not look that way to us when we get in the field.
If they apply for like a business license or something, then yes, it would be the municipality's job to do that. But according to our permit, that's not the municipality's job. That's correct.
Yeah. So what we find, so there's the city that gets the business license and a reported code, an NICS code or SIC code, and then from that, it may determine they need a permit or not. And so the discharge, if the inspector goes out from the city and says, I don't think that you are this SIC code, I think you're this one, then it becomes a discussion, and it can involve the regional board. It can even come up to state board for us to, and the lawyers at that point, to figure out the appropriate SIC code. But anytime we give out a SIC code, it's from the information we have at the time. We don't always even get the complete information, so we do the best we can to answer those SIC code questions. But Reagan's correct. It is the discharger's obligation to define their industrial activity. Then, so we do see some letters from cities where they've said you are required to get the permit under the SIC code, and the discharger says, well, that's not what I'm doing, and then it becomes that discussion. So, these things are hard. These SIC codes are very old. They're not always very clear, as we're seeing through this matrix.
Yes.
So we're trying to get on the same page with the information we do have to help the cities do their jobs with the business licenses, as well as reporting non-filers to the regions.
And if they just don't know what SIC code is, you can suggest something. There's nothing wrong with that.
Rachel Kish, just a quick question. If your business license program does not collect these, do you have any advice for cities or those who are trying to implement their permits? If you just don't have that information, how would you advise they go about the non-filer requirement?
So if they don't have the SIC code, it might be an individual by individual, or you just get a feel for where these facilities are. When you go out and see one, you kind of know after you do this a few times what they're doing, unless it becomes some financial record subpoena where you have to see exactly how much they're doing of what economically. But for the most part, if you have a bunch of business licenses, it might even be the name of the business could give you a hint. It could be the location. Sometimes there's just districts of certain types of businesses. I don't know if Rich Mall has any suggestions for how a city would do that, but you might just start kind of gathering the data, or Michelle. Yeah.
I have a quick suggestion on that as well. I mean, if you're a city looking at these, and we just showed you the OSHA SIC code, if you don't know the code, or you're not sure if the code's correct, or it's a non-filer, you could use the search feature and start looking at those major categories and groups and the activities associated with them. Would they fall into an SIC code that's under attachment A? That's one piece.
And I'm not done with my presentation yet, so.
Do we want to reserve questions for after?
Yeah, I think that would be
Okay.
helpful. All right, so we went through those few exercises, and these are the things to consider when you're looking at warehouses. Another thing that I want to talk about is the SIC code manual uses the term establishment to determine the primary economic activity of the facility. But there can be multiple economic activities or similar to economic activities going on at a facility which require multiple primary SIC codes. And our main example for this is a military base. So primarily the SIC code is 9711 for military bases, and a lot of these are covered under the Phase 2 permit. But they also have on-site things like landfills, airfields, shipbuilding facilities. So as Laurel was talking about earlier, if you can draw a circle around it, and if it walks, talks, acts like an industrial facility, then it probably needs coverage, in addition to the Phase 2 permit for the entire site. So I just wanted to make that distinction. There can be multiple primary SIC codes on one facility. And the SIC code manual uses auxiliary facilities, and for the most part, auxiliary, if it's off-site, doesn't need coverage. But if it is on-site, then you would want to include that in your SWIP, and it would be an industrial part of your facility. And some of these activities could be maintenance shops, storage areas, admin offices, on or off-site. The admin offices generally don't need permit coverage, or you don't need to include that in the SWIP. But if it's industrial in nature, then you'd want to, if it's on site, you'd want to include that in your SWIP. So if auxiliary functions occur at the facility, they should be included in the SWIP, like I said. Auxiliary functions are generally not subject to permit coverage if off-site. Okay, so there are some distinctions in permit coverage. So providing services is different than manufacturing. Most facilities that do have like an assembly line of goods would be manufacturing, but providing a service like a contractor who goes out and installs a swimming pool or something like that's a service, and those generally don't fall under the IGP. And that goes along with this mass production versus custom orders thing that I was talking about. I'm going to skip this because we'll talk about this a little bit later. Some of the determinations are, you would need help from the state and regional water boards, and feel free to contact any of us there to ask us, what the right move is if you're not sure.
We can touch on the cabinet manufacturer thing. So in the division description, it talks about the difference between, for manufacturing, it talks about the difference between contractors and manufacturers. And it's so, we're kind of skipping this because it's so site specific of how much they do in the shop versus at the site. Depending on how much they're doing and what exactly they're doing, they could be manufacturing or a service. And so we're not gonna, we've used this example for a long time, and it may be getting a little more clear soon on where those buckets fall, but it really depends on exactly what the site's doing to answer this question.
Thank you, Laurel. And I also provided the link for you guys to the stormwater fact sheets that Gerald already showed you. So that's this link. And that's the end of this presentation. So here's my contact information. And feel free to contact me with any questions. And now I will open it up to additional questions. I see Bob has his hand up again. The very back.
My question is on schools. Since the SIC code for a school is the education of children, which isn't a covered SIC code, how does the bus maintenance get pulled into that activity?
The bus maintenance gets pulled in because it is vehicle maintenance, and vehicle maintenance is something that's covered under the IGP. Like I was saying with the military bases, if you can draw a circle around it and acts like an industrial facility, then it's an industrial facility.
But aren't they mostly doing local trucking per se?
Yeah, local trucking they are required to get permit coverage.
But you're
Local trucking is, if that's what they do, local trucking as a business requires permit coverage.
But your primary SIC code is the education of children, not working on buses.
Well, this is a determination that has been made at the water board ever since I've been working
Since
here.
1992, we've been given the guidance and direction that school bus maintenance is pulled in as a lookalike facility to a other type, like if you had a contract with someone who is doing vehicle maintenance on school buses, it's no different than the school doing it at their site. So this stuff's from the 1990s, and our legal staff has not overturned that guidance, and it still stands into this permit, as you can read in the fact sheet. So it is the rules as of today with the school bus maintenance. Will that change? I'm not sure, but as it is for now, it stands.
Okay, and then part two of this question is countertop makers. So can you describe who's covered? So I have a facility that delivers the granite to a facility that then cuts the granite and then sells it to the customer, as well as your local countertop places, kitchen stores who have these granite pieces and a bunch of other materials, of course, and they're cutting per customer requests based on a job. Can you explain the difference between those two and who should have industrial permit coverage?
Well, they're very site specific, and they're similar to these cabinet makers. Like if you're doing mostly manufacturing of the countertop at a warehouse or something along those lines, then that would need IGP coverage. But if you're like a contractor and just cutting a little slice into a cabinet for a special order, that generally wouldn't need permit coverage. Does that answer your question? Not at all?
I see where you're coming from there, but they're both kind of doing the same thing, but one is, going out into the environment and getting a piece of granite, and then they cut it into these slabs. Okay? So would they be covered?
Yes.
If they
If
mass
that's
produce
primarily what
it,
they're doing, yes.
yeah.
Okay, then I deliver those slabs to a retail establishment that I, as a customer, can come in and order my kitchen countertop. And this facility is then cutting, sanding, doing probably worse things. Are they covered?
If they're doing most of the work at a distinct facility location, and that's primarily what they're doing, which we're just talking hypotheticals here, they could be considered manufacturing. And it depends on how much they're doing at the warehouse. Is it incidental cutting, or is it going into most of the work's done on the contracted site? Now, if you're talking about a large box store that also does tile cutting and they do windows and all those things, you'd have to see if that's even primary enough but if they're a granite manufacturer and they're doing a significant amount of manufacturing work at a location, it can fall into manufacturing or the service. So it would really depend on exactly what they're doing. And this is something that's hard to determine unless you have a very specific example. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true.
And we're not going to get into specific examples here.
Right. Because they don't apply to every, you can give one example and then there's something a little tweaked at a different facility and it changes the outcome. So in general, the regional board person could look at it and say, well, if it looks and talks and smells and walks like an industrial facility, it potentially could be actually manufacturing.
Use your best professional judgment, Bob.
Hi, I'm Beth Baldwin with the Contra Costa Clean Water Program. We see a lot of like nurseries and landscaping companies, and so they have some outdoor storage with different types of maybe bricks or pavers, and they have some forklifts that are moving those things around in small bays. But my understanding is that unless they're doing vehicle maintenance on site of their forklifts and things like that, they would not require an industrial permit.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well,
we don't cover
actually, the maintenance of the forklift, they can do that on site. It has to do if they're making something. Are they just mixing? If they just have storage of landscape materials?
Yeah, just storage and then moving it around.
It's a service,
Yeah, it's
and
a
they're
service.
moving their product around.
Right.
They're not making anything. We don't have a way to get them because everybody maintain. I mean, Rayleigh's has a forklift they might maintain. We're not pulling everybody in because they have a forklift.
Okay.
So that's where the distinction is. So just because they have a forklift, whether or not they're maintaining it, doesn't mean they're industrial vehicle maintenance transportation facility.
Okay, what if they have trucks delivering that goods to residents?
If it's local trucking, it'd be
Yeah.
auxiliary to their operation, which their primary activity is selling landscape materials, and they might work on their few trucks, or how many trucks they have, 10 or so.
Yeah.
And if they work on them on site, it's auxiliary to their operation. The minute you see a facility that is located in Sacramento and most of their trucks are going to LA and potentially Redding, and they work on those trucks, that they're actually a transportation company.
Okay, thank you.
Even if it's their own goods, because it's pulling them out of that auxiliary establishment like
Right.
Reagan talked about.
Thank you.
So, for the MS4s, are we supposed to ask for some sort of economic breakdown if that's how they come up
No.
with their? Okay.
So
Cool.
it can help. I mean, when people call us, we say, well, how much of this do you do? How much of that do you do? For example, we'll take a brewery. You know, how much do you sell in the restaurant, brewery restaurant? Well, everything. Okay, how much do you sell at a wholesale establishment? We don't have a contract with Bevmo or something like that. Okay, well, you're mainly a restaurant. So you don't have to get down. I have had to do it where I get the number of trucks you're doing, number of garbage trucks you're fueling versus the number of on-site vehicle trucks to see how much long-distance trucking fueling they're doing. So sometimes you have to go there. If you start having to go down that road because they don't want the permit or it's getting gray, you should contact the region or the state, and we can help you.
Yes.
Because what happens if we get people that they get this permit and they don't have a SIT code that really defines what they're doing, it can throw out enforcement cases later when they find out they didn't need the permit for the last 10 years, as well as it can throw out lawsuits and things like that. So we want to make sure that people who get this information from the cities and the state and the region are as consistent as possible.
Yeah, but then again, it's ultimately up to the discharger to decide what SIC code they fall under.
Okay, so say you have a warehouse that collects recyclable materials but doesn't break them down, but makes most of their money on consulting, then the warehouse part would be auxiliary, is that right?
Theoretically.
So what we'll do a hypothetical. Where is the recycling goods coming from?
All over.
Their own materials or?
No, they consult with companies and collect things that they don't want anymore, and then they warehouse it, package it up, and send it off to, I don't know where it goes.
Like used goods?
Do they
or are
use
we
their
talking
own
about
trucks?
cans and bottles?
Like used computers or used
e-waste.
office equipment. Yeah, e-waste.
Do they have their own trucks? Do they maintain
Yes.
those trucks on site?
They don't maintain the trucks on site. They do have some outdoor storage.
See, this is a very site specific.
Okay.
You know.
We'll
and,
put it on the board.
and we're trying to stay away from site
Sure.
specific
Thank you.
things, because that would just take forever.
Hello, my name is Mika Sheffield. I'm with the City of Reading. And I have a question that actually goes a little step further, where in the MS4 permit, if we find an industrial facility that does not have a permit, we have to notify the water board within 30 days of a non-filer. So my question is, because I've had that question asked of me, is what happens? You know, whether we call or that electronic input, once we say, okay, this facility, we've given them 30 days, they haven't come into compliance, they don't have a permit, but they need one. So what happens from there? How, what's the process? How long does it take? What's the water board going to do with that information, basically?
That's
Reagan,
more-
I can jump in here.
Yeah, that's more of a.
So the municipalities are required per their MS4 permit, whether it's phase 1 or phase 2, to report, to conduct an inventory of their activity or their industrial construction or commercial, depending on the permit, annually. If they are identifying that there are non-filers because they've conducted their own inventory inspections of their city or their municipality, and they have determined X, Y, and Z as being potential non-filers, again, it's not the municipality's responsibility to determine whether or not they need permit coverage. It's their recommendation based on their observations and information. Hey, we think they may need permit coverage. You're referring that to the regional board, and the regional board at that time, depending on priorities, does either a site inspection or can send out a blanket letter saying, hey, you may need to have permit coverage, identify your SIC code, and then it can go from there. If a regional board or state board does an inspection and the regional board or state board has determined that based on their own eyes and their evaluation that they have to have permit coverage, they would send a formal enforcement action to the discharger that starts a clock. After 2 notices of noncompliances, if the discharger has not responded, whether saying, oh, yes, we need an NOI, we need an NOC, or excuse me, NEC, or this isn't even applicable, we need a NONA, then that's when monetary penalties kick in. And so that is a lot of effort. We don't want to get there. No one wants to get to that level. And so there's a lot of cooperation between, hopefully, the regional board and the dischargers to, 1, educate, and 2, determine which permit they may need to fall under.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So once you know, I mean, I am talking about a specific facility, but it's also just general. Let's say, we know that they need coverage, and you say then, you send out a letter and the clock starts ticking, and I realize it's all about manpower and, what's on your desk and things like that. But is there a set time frame? Do you do it like every 30 days? Does the discharger get 90 days? Kind of what's a time frame by which you would force them to come into compliance before fining them?
Once the regional board has conducted an inspection and they've issued that first notice of noncompliance, only once that first notice of noncompliance is issued does that quote-unquote clock start. If the city or the municipality reports a list of potential non-filers 6 months ago and the regional board hasn't touched that list, it's not necessarily penalizing the municipality or the discharger. It's just the regional board hasn't addressed that issue yet.
Well, and I think it's taken some folks a while to file for coverage too. So it's typically 30 days is what we give them on the first notice, but it's taking substantially longer than that sometimes, depending on the facility, how sophisticated they are, and that type of thing. So it just depends on the facility, but typically it's taken around 45 plus days to bring somebody, maybe 60 days before they really file for coverage and get everything done in smarts and pay the money and kind of do everything.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? All right. So what we got next is a quiz and our special breakout session.
And since we talked about cabinet manufacturers, number 5, there's not enough information in the question. It could be yes or no. So just skip number 5 or guess.
Yeah. And I'll give you guys 10, 15 minutes to finish this. would help. That's the thing that kept happening. It kept falling off.
That would help though. That's right, I think. Then it's not gonna.
Yeah, that's a little better. Because talking up here with the... Uh-oh.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it's a high volume business, and so it's not like a contractor that cuts one or two of your house, tired of taking your house.
Oh, just hold on. Yeah. We're going to go over.
Well, that's this one, so that makes sense. But this is like. This is like a 30,000 square foot facility.
It is tough. It is tough. No, no, that's very helpful.
And they make it at that too. Or,
It is hard.
yeah, yeah. So they put all kinds of shit.
But yeah, it's got a different flavor than yours, Dan, because it's a different audience. Or it is an audience. Yours doesn't really have an audience. What? Yeah, I know. But I got Bob.
Now you're good stuff.
Of course. I got Bob instead. Me and Rebecca were totally talking about this before.
Clarify. Well, actually, that was the contract was one I gave him, and I said, I don't know what. He goes, I don't know. We're trying to get people to understand.
They are asking a lot more, like phase two, the municipal questions, this time.
Well, we're leaning on the jurisdiction because, you know, sometimes. Much of those too. We have a lot of traditional, but some of them, there's probably facilities,
Like Roseville.
they're, well, Roseville, but all like San Joaquin, Stanislaus, you know, they're, everybody's designated. And now the non-traditional is, so. Yeah, most of the traditional.
Yeah, things like the campus people for UC.
Well, that's always.
All right, is everybody done with the quiz? Does anybody need more time? All right, sounds like everybody's done. So here's all the quiz questions, and we're going to go over them real quick. So the first one, a facility primarily conducts retail sales of yogurt in a strip mall. They ship and receive raw goods from a loading dock behind the mall, and employees use hand trucks, and strip mall provides a cardboard baler for the tenants. Does this activity require an IGP coverage? How many people answered yes? Okay, nobody? How many people answered no? Almost everybody. Okay, that's good. Good job, guys. I won't go over this one because it sounds like you got it. Number 2, a facility that stores their own company's goods is SIC code 4225. How many people answered yes? Why did you answered yes? Can you tell me why you answered yes? Sorry, Mark, I forgot to.
It's the best I could remember on the slide, and I
Yeah.
don't have the book memorized is all.
Okay. So for clarity's sake, the answer is no. And to fall under SIC code 4225, you have to do warehousing as a business and storing other people's goods, not your own line of goods. So that's why the answer is no. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, number 3. A grocery store maintains their forklifts and trucks that conduct only local trucking. They also only truck their own goods. This grocery store would need coverage under the IGP because of the maintenance operations. How many people answered yes? How many people answered no? Okay, David, why did you answer no? Could you hold on for the microphone real quick? Sorry about that.
This is Dave Innes, Region 3. I didn't think that the trucking part was part of their primary economic activity and only an auxiliary function.
That's correct.
I
So
answered
so
no.
the answer was no. And that was a good explanation. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
Number 4, a military base with a shipbuilding yard does not need IGP coverage since their primary SIC code is 9711. How many people answered yes? Anybody? How many people answered no? Not everybody raised their hands that time. But it looks like everybody answered no. So, and that's the correct answer. That the no is the appropriate answer because at a military base, there's multiple activities going on, but their primary SIC code is 9711. They could also have shipbuilding and landfills on site that do require IGP coverage. Number 5. Oh, we're skipping number 5, so we'll just skip that one. It
For
was
number
no.
5, it was no, but reading the division description, in some cases they actually could be a manufacturer, depending on how much they're doing at their site where they're building stuff. So if they mainly, it's more involved than we intended for this quiz.
But Southern California got this question in their quiz, so you guys are lucky. Okay, number 6. A winery with an exposed crush pad and open bins of grapes qualify for an NEC without changing the site at all? How many people answered yes? This is kind of a foreshadowing question. We haven't really talked about NEC yet. Nobody answered yes? How many people answered no? Good job, guys. That is correct. Because any exposed industrial activity, crushing is considered an industrial activity at the wineries, and we'll talk about wineries a little bit later. So yeah, the answer is no. Number 7, to qualify for the NEC, the facility owner has to cover materials while it is raining. How many people answered yes? How many people answered no? Wow, you guys are really good. Could somebody explain to me why the answer is no? Somebody? Anybody? All right.
So the question says that they only need things to be covered when it's raining, but actually with an NEC, you don't want anything exposed at any time.
That's correct. Thank you.
I'll add to that. We'll talk about it a little more too. It's the NEC exposure, and this is before we've discussed it, is it's expected to, you have to have a condition of no exposure to expected to reasonably continue to exist. It isn't just, well, today I don't have no exposure, tomorrow I will.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared. Number 8, a SWIP is required for a facility with NEC coverage. How many people answered yes for that one? Nobody? How many people answered no? Good job. You're doing really well. Okay, number 9. An auto dismantler, SIC code 5015, that has no exposure of industrial activities to stormwater may apply for the NEC. How many people answered yes? How many people answered no? Nobody? Not a single person? Okay. Why did, can somebody explain why they answered yes? Please, somebody volunteer. Bob. Yay, Bob.
Any facility that can claim no exposure can file an NEC.
Thank you, Bob. That is correct. Number 10, all SMARTS data is publicly available. How many people answered yes? How many people answered no? Bob, why'd you answer no?
I don't think all of it is. There's confidential information that can be stored in SMARTS, as well as regional board staff stuff that's not seen by the public.
That is technically correct, but we're talking about data. Data was the key word here. So all SMARTS data is publicly available. But Bob is right. Facilities can hold back some information if it's proprietary to their industrial process, or if it's a security issue or something along those lines. So.
And some of the regional board data, unless it's what the regions know more than me, can't they do a PRA, Public Record Act request for some of that? Okay.
So that would make it publicly available. Right. It's not. It's a bad question.
Duly noted.
Duly noted. But I think you guys all got the intent. Right? No? All right.
If a discharger enters data in SMARTS, it's publicly available. They wouldn't enter attorney-client privilege data in SMARTS, and the confidential stuff, they actually give that to the region in a folder marked or mark it confidential paper copy. So there isn't any confidential data from a discharger and smarts.
Question?
I have a question about the mapping. If an airport facility puts their map out, what is the security for any kind of homeland security prevention?
They can redact it.
Yeah.
So they would have a. So I've had this talk with airports. I said, well, what's the difference between the Google Earth image? You know, that you, if it's anything you'd see on a Google Earth image that anybody can access, start there. And then the things that are extremely sensitive and specific, like how many of this chemical, exactly where the fuel tanks are, and things like that, you could make a claim that it's confidential because of Homeland Security. So you would be redacting that and putting in your SWIP, or at least letting the region know you're redacting it because of Homeland Security. And the regions are going to have a feel for what would be appropriate and what wouldn't. So you do your best to redact what you feel is appropriate, but saying you can't have a site map for an airport is not really
Not
true.
appropriate, yeah.
Yeah, I think it becomes kind of a level of detail thing. I've done some explosive facilities where I just don't have them put everything on there. You can see it from Google Earth, but just don't label what it is. And so that's kind of how we've sort of done that.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. All right, we are on number 11. A public storage operation that rents storage lockers to the general public for monthly use is required to obtain coverage under the IGP. How many people answered yes? Nobody? How many people answered no? Okay, why did you answer no? Hold on, wait for the mic.
Generally, they have no industrial processing of any goods. There's no distribution of any goods. There's no transportation.
Yeah,
no
that's
maintenance.
generally the idea.
Now,
yeah.
if it was a warehousing that was all industrial trade goods, that's when you get into the 4225 scenario. Very good.
Yes, very good, thank you.
There's a SIC code. I don't have it memorized, but there is a SIC code service for vehicle storage. I will look it up as we continue the quiz.
Okay, number 12. An auto dismantler, SIC code 5015, is required to submit stormwater documentation before they are granted a dismantler's license from the DMV. How many people answered yes? How many people answered no? Okay, you back there. Why did you answer no? Yeah. Sure. Wait for the mic.
I answered no because I've actually never heard of that as being a requirement, and I figured it must have popped up somewhere if it was. And unfortunately, I also can't just imagine that kind of coordination between the different agencies. So.
That's what they said in Southern California too. But the answer is yes. We have done coordination with the DMV, and to get your dismantler license or renewal of the license, you need to show DMV proof that you either have coverage or don't need coverage or have an NEC or something along those lines.
But not every business that has a dismantling license needs a stormwater permit.
That's correct.
So that's the fun part of this one.
There is a nuance to it, and I'll talk
Yes.
about that later in one of my presentations.
So to get back to Bob's question, automobile parking fits under 7521. And if they are only parking dead storage automobiles, so automobiles that don't run anymore, they go into 4226 of special warehousing. So automobiles you don't own that don't run and you store enough of them, it's 4226. If you store somebody's running RVs and you're just letting them park there, I believe in most cases it would be 7521 because they're not dead vehicles.
And most of those aren't SIC codes that fall under the IGP.
And I want to piggyback off of the DMV question. The regional boards are also working in coordination with CDFA, the weights and measures, and they are, okay, never mind then.
To be continued.
But do you have
Yeah.
something new to add about it?
No, the regional boards are working with weights and measures, and they are contacting us to coordinate stormwater enforcement.
And I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. Number 13, a facility with NOI coverage is required to sample 4 times a year. How many people answered yes? Okay, how many people answered no? Okay, who answered no? Because I know not everybody's hand was raised for yes.
What if we added per discharge location to the end of that? That's true. Bad question.
Well, so somebody that answered yes, why did you answer yes? Anybody? Somebody? Do you Thank you, Mark, for passing the microphone around.
Individual permittees are required, just part of the basic monitoring requirements. You have to try and get 4 samples a year, 2 in the first half and 2 in the second half.
That's
But I
correct.
agree, it's
Yeah.
kind of open-ended. There's lots of caveats to.
There are caveats to it. But in general, a facility with NOI coverage is required to sample 4 times a year. As long as there are 4 QSEs to sample.
I think one of the key points of maybe your question initially was that the old permit, 97 permit, dealt with a wet season and a dry season. This new permit has clarified that we want at least 4 with, yes, caveats as those have mentioned.
That's correct. And you only needed 2 samples in the old permit. And the QSEs were defined differently. But if you are in a group compliance group, you have some sampling reduction there too. But we're not going to get into that. So number 14, a restaurant that has a small microbrewery operation that only sells directly to customers for on-site consumption is required to apply for coverage under the IGP. How many people answered yes? Nobody? How many people answered no? Well, that's a good job. And somebody who answered no, can you explain why? Pick somebody, Mark.
In this particular case, primary economic activity is related to restaurant, not manufacturer of beer.
That's correct.
Now, if this was not a restaurant, but a brewery specifically that distributed its product to its customers there at the location and off-site, that would be different?
Yes, if they sell to the wholesale market, then they would need IGP coverage.
Thank you.
Like small breweries like Rubicon, they have coverage under our permit. Or Racer 7, I don't know if you guys know where that is, but those are some local breweries that have IGP coverage.
Well, it's retail, so you'd have to.
The question was if they only sell on site in cases, do they require IGP coverage?
It's kind of like a vineyard where they have the wine bottles for sale in the tasting room. So they don't have a restaurant, but they have a little tasting room, but they're selling the wine retail. For the purposes of wineries and breweries, retail and wholesale are kind of treated the same. So even though they're selling it on site, they probably still need a permit if they do enough of it. So
Yeah, it all depends on how much they make from it, kind of.
yeah. So if they have a huge restaurant and they just have, you can buy a bottle, they have it once a month, a promotion or something, if you spend enough money, whatever they do at wineries. then it may not be primary, but if it's enough of it, yeah, it could throw them into the manufacturing
Yeah.
SIT code.
So is that clear for everyone? Number 15, last question. A plastics material facility that unloads plastic flakes from a uncovered rail spur into a building would be candidate for meeting NEC criteria. How many people answered yes? How many people answered no? Shuko, why did you answer no? Pick someone else? Okay. Somebody else. Mark, you pick.
Basically, there's the unloading operation isn't covered, and you've got tiny light plastic flakes, going who knows where.
That's correct. And I'll show you some photos of that a little bit later in another one of my presentations. So good job, guys. You did very well on the quiz. And do we even need to continue this training?
You guys are so good. You should be up here. So we are going to break for lunch unless there's no questions. We're
Yeah,
going to come.
Is there more questions?
Yeah. There's nothing from the web.
Hi, Humberto Amador with the City of Sacramento. I just need some clarification on question 3. How does it differ from school buses when you're doing maintenance of forklifts and trucks on site? I answered yes on that question because I assume the maintenance of all the equipment, the forklifts and trucks on site would justify it being under the IG permit.
For which
well-
one? Number 3?
Yeah.
So you got it.
Okay, it's the grocery store is a retail facility, and the retail facilities don't need IGP coverage because that's what they do for their business. Their economic activity is retail. It's different with schools because they don't have a retail activity like teaching kids is not a money-making activity, but
they're both doing maintenance of
But they do-
vehicles
they
and
do
and
maintain
forklifts.
trucks.
So the pollutant source is still there.
it's not every school. It's just the schools where they have. Usually, a school district has a designated location where they maintain their buses, and so that location would need IGP coverage.
So all the SIT code divisions and things don't always make sense for water quality.
That's true.
These were federally defined in the US EPA's permit, and having stormwater quality hinged on economic activity is difficult. So it doesn't always make sense.
Okay.
But we do have the federal regulations in place, and we have the state specific guidance on some of these. So we have the school bus maintenance that needs a permit, but under retail setting for a grocery store, if they have forklifts and they have local trucks, they do not need coverage. So it's what we have.
Okay.
Does that help? Kinda.
Agreed.
We
yes,
agree with
agreed.
that. With that, yeah. Yeah, I didn't make up those rules.
Yeah, so and then hopefully for the commercial, if they kind of go into the commercial and other sectors in a city, they have ordinances. They can't violate an ordinance or the Clean Water Act, even if they don't have a permit. So there are mechanisms to still require them to do
That's true.
the right thing at their site to maintain the integrity of the MS4 discharges.
Yeah, you can get a violation for discharging without a permit for any discharge, really. Any other questions? Or is everybody hungry? David? Wait for the mic, please. Yeah, Dave.
This is Dave Ennis of the Region 3 again. In the monitoring of a discharge, if it continues for months on end, you don't have to take any more readings. This is like a couple of boneyard pools that, accepting water up at a high level, and then they keep discharging through a whole cliff face, and they come out on a road, and this quarry is sampling there, but it never stops until the rain stops.
It's a continuous discharge.
Yeah. it
Yeah,
doesn't
we've
meet the
seen that at
definition.
landfills too, where they have a seep, not a landfill seep, not at the active area, but they have a stormwater pond that kind of continuously flows. And I asked them, well, how do you ever get the start of discharge? And they said, well, it'll dry up for a little bit, and then if it rains, we get the sample. So if they've sampled and they've done their 4 qualifying events, it's almost like a containment, huh?
They only got one?
Only get one event because it doesn't
Oh,
stop
because it doesn't
discharging.
stop.
the
So
whole
if it
year.
never stops, it really never stops, then yeah, they do one event. Yep.
Jared, you talked about steam electric and the exposure at a coal-fired facility. I don't know if we have any of those in California, but at a fossil, natural gas or a nuclear facility, are you saying these would not need coverage if everything was under?
Well, it really depends on the fuels. Natural gas is different than the coal, but really it's almost the coverage under that attachment A category is really more focused on the coal-fired plants, whether it's steam electric or nuclear powered, and it's dealing with that exposure potential of that pollutant source and runoff of precipitation from that pollutant source.
I will also be talking about facilities that produce electricity a little later, like cogen operations, things like that.
There's actual steam solar facilities too. So.
I wanted to add to your question about the continuous discharge. I've been to some facilities kind of similar to that, but they're not always covered under a general permit because it's almost a complete point source discharge, similar like a wastewater plant, continually discharges end of pipe type. Oftentimes those can roll into individual MPDS permits.
Well, we sure want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Then I have one other question about a concrete and asphalt recycling facility.
Okay.
What SIC code would that fall under?
Asphalt recycling?
It depends.
Concrete, yeah, we're getting a lot of concrete come out of big projects and then they grind it up for base.
We had this question come up recently.
What we've kind of centered around is 5093. If all they do is recycling a product into a new product, so they're taking the asphalt and pulverizing it somehow into a new product, they're actually 5093. Most of the time. We can't cover everything, and I know you guys are tired of our caveats, but that's the general rule of thumb.
Is that like land application?
Land, like a
5093 is just.
Oh, that's recycling.
It is recycling.
The recycling of goods, so the assembly, breaking up, sorting. So that would be breaking something up into a new material. So it covers, it's interesting, it's one wholesale trade category that covers paper recyclers, e-waste, scrap metal, as well as this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this particular facility broke up the concrete and sold what they broke up as aggregate for more concrete.
Yeah, that's a big business right now.
Yeah. Any other questions? Is everybody hungry?
So we're coming back at 12:45, and there's a list of restaurants up here. So it's free range wherever you want to go. Just be back at 12:45.